Recording in progress.
I'd like to welcome our special guest for this session today, Henk Keilman. Thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thank you too for inviting me. It's my pleasure and my honor.
Okay, and the reason that we invited you for this session is actually because now there's an updated version of your book in English with the title Intelligence or Chaos. But there's a subtitle to the book, and the subtitle is The Atheist Delusion. Could you explain a little bit about that? Because, you know, it's kind of, what are we talking about here?
Yeah, well, the title of the book is Intelligence or Chaos, which in the end translates back to the debate between theism and atheism, except that I expressed that in a contemporary language, because we understand today in the age of computers and digital information, we understand the principle of intelligence and information. And of course, there's a lot of things that is written about what is chaos. So fundamentally, the title expresses the two possibilities in terms of explaining the origin of our universe and the existence of our universe. There's only these two possibilities. Either the universe came out of a state of chaos, or it came out of something which is full of information, intelligence, and consciousness. There's no other possibility. There's nothing in between. So if you have the answer to the one, by elimination, you have the answer to the other one, which is, if you have an answer, did it come out of chaos? And the answer is no, definitively no, it cannot have happened that way. Then the alternative by elimination is that it must have originated from intelligence, consciousness, and information. So it's the age-old debate about theism versus atheism, except that we're now living in an age after the gone for 400 years scientific revolution. We have entered into an incredible new phase, the digital phase, the ability to work and investigate the universe with incredibly powerful computers, incredibly powerful instruments, telescopes, microscopes, atom smashers, and as we have in CERN, particle accelerators, you know, to be able to do incredible experiments. And that advancement of science, you know, on the level of technology, on the level of deep understanding, that has led to the understanding for the first time really, and I would say in scientific history, that we have empirical proof that chaos cannot have been the origin of the universe. It's simply impossible. And there's two main reasons for that. One is there are statistical analyses that have calculated what is the chance of this universe having come about by chance at the time of the Big Bang, you know, the first billionth of a second of a Big Bang. That chance is expressed in a number. It's the number 10 to the power 10 to the power 123. It's 10 with 123 zeros. If you would write out the number, you would actually fill up the visible universe. That number is so extremely large that the chance of that having been a possibility as to how the creation came about is just eliminated. It's impossible. According to statistical mathematics, if something is smaller than 10 to the power 50, then it's already considered from improbable, it's moved to impossible. Now we're talking about something that has the improbability of 10 to the power 10 to the power of 123. It's just totally impossible. So that's one really powerful argument. The second powerful argument is that already with Einstein and later in quantum physics, it was discovered that the universe is actually filled with energy. There is no empty space. There's no nothingness, there's no emptiness. In fact, everything is full. In quantum theory, this is called the quantum field. It's a field where everything coexists. All potential and actual realities, possibilities, energies, and attributes coexist simultaneously in that quantum field. But there is no emptiness there, it's full. Whereas the atheistic argument is always based on the fact that we have a kind of dualistic or pluralistic universe. We have the infinite void, pure nothingness, and in that infinite void, sometimes there appears a universe, with atoms and matter and energy, and sometimes not. But the void is always there. And because that void is the biggest principle in a way of existence, everything that resides in it, in a way, is inferior to the void. And it is also disconnected by the void. That's why we call it pluralistic universe. That means there is chaos, the fundamental chaos. When I use the word chaos, it's basically particles residing in the infinite void. And there are a few fundamental laws that determine the movement of those particles, like Newton's laws and other laws of physics, but fundamentally they are disconnected. And because of that disconnect, there is no unity. Therefore, if something comes out of it that appears to be complex and functioning and designed and, you know, like a living being, like a human being, then that in the end came about by chance, reactions, random mutations of matter and interacting, and in over billions of years, these complex interactions lead to something that is complex and functioning and appears to be designed. This is, for instance, how Darwin's theory of evolution is explained. It starts with a very simple one cellular entity, and then over millions of years it evolves into a human being with hundreds of billions of cells in his body. You know, a multicellular, cellular, extremely complex organism, and all by chance. So that possibility has been eliminated by these two factors, the 10 times 10 times 123 number, which is the impossibility that it could have happened that way. And second, the discovery that there is no empty space. The universe is filled with energy, what we call space. And even Einstein recognized it at a certain point, because his theory of general relativity describes gravity as basically the curvature of space, and implicitly acknowledging that space cannot be empty. If it's curved, obviously there's not empty. It's a field of energy. And in quantum physics, that was further understood, the quantum field. That means the universe is fundamentally one. It is connected. It's not chaotic. And therefore, it must be organized, and it must be driven by intelligence and information. For the first time in history, we have empirical evidence that there is a supreme intelligence that is orchestrating and driving the universe.
Still, I grew up in a world that said, well, listen, we're living in a material and a mechanistic universe, and everything can be explained, but there's no necessity whatsoever of a higher power or an intelligence or something or someone that's in control. Why would it be? That's been, you know, the power of atheism. You know, there are, in my book I explained, there are four fundamental theories of, or you could say, postulates of atheism upon which they have built the atheistic understanding of our universe. And the first one is what I just mentioned, the fact that the universe is pluralistic. It's void and matter. And they randomly move around, and by accident something very complex and sophisticated comes out of it. But it's all random, it's all accident. So that's the first principle. The second principle of atheism, that the only reality is matter. There's nothing existing outside of matter. The third one is that if the universe would have been created, because now we have the Big Bang theory, which usually atheists don't like very much. They prefer the theory that the universe is kind of eternal, you know, void and matter coexisting eternally. They call that the steady state theory, because that facilitates the idea of atoms moving at random and by accident creating something sophisticated and useful. But if there is a cause to the universe, which now they have to acknowledge, like Richard Dawkins, he also acknowledges the existence of the Big Bang. He says, but if there is that origin has to be of ultimate simplicity. And when you say that origin is God, God is a complex being. So couldn't be God, because you enter into an infinite regression, because then something else would have had to be creating God, because God is complex. Now, Dawkins assumes that the ultimate cause of everything must be as simple as possible. Now, the one explanation for that is the idea that Stephen Hawking embraces, that, okay, that simplest thing is void, nothingness. So, you know, there's nothing simpler than nothing, right? It's the most simple thing that is existing because it's not existing. So it's really simple.
So he comes up with the theory that the universe in the end emerged through the singularity into a universe out of nothingness. Dawkins doesn't specifically say that, as far as I remember reading him, but he says it must be ultimately simple. But that ultimate simplicity is just an assumption on his part. And in fact, it leads to the illogical conclusion that something very simple, and the most simple thing, as we just discussed, is nothingness, that something very simple is able to create something that's very complex. In other words, here something is coming out of nothing. And that is fundamentally wrong, because all of science is based, all of our systems of logic and thinking and scientific investigation is based on the principle that something cannot come from nothing. Yet, for atheists, that is a very fundamental principle that must be embraced, because without it, atheism just won't work.
Now, let's just suppose that there is something like intelligent design, that there is a higher intelligence that is controlling everything. Now, my question would be, okay, let's assume we call this higher intelligence God. Is God a sadist? Is God somebody who needs to be in a 12-step program? Or doesn't he exist at all? How many wars have not been fought because of religion?
Yeah. Well, that's, the ultimate question. And as I discussed in our previous discussion, this is the argument, the problem of evil, in which in fact is the strongest argument of any atheistic philosophy. The fact that this universe is, maybe there is a God, but why did he create this lousy universe? With birth, right, death, disease, old age, wars, concentration camps, mass genocides, terrible things that people do to one another. But even beyond what people do to one another, we have earthquakes, we have tsunamis, we have, huge meteors. In the past, some meteor has hit Earth, I think 60 billion years ago is the assumption, and wiped out all life on Earth practically, specifically the dinosaurs. So, the universe that we live in is imperfect. It's violent. It's and from our personal experience, we may have parts of our life that we are kind of happy, and but in the end, we all have to die and grow old and get sick and whatever. So it's never really perfect. So if God exists and he's all powerful, so he could create anything, the right, most perfect thing you can possibly imagine, and he's also a loving God. He loves us. He wants the best for us. Then how did it end up like this? And that is the problem of evil, or the theodicy, that it kind of contradicts our existence of suffering in this world, contradicts the idea of there being an almighty, benevolent God. Now, the Vedanta philosophy of India, which is the oldest philosophy on this planet, and it's a highly philosophical, brilliant, but also mystical philosophy, and referring to it because it gives some incredible insight into this question of the theodicy, but also into physics and cosmology. So that's why I'm referring to it. And it has greatly inspired me in my understanding of what is the purpose of life, and also why is there evil. The Vedanta philosophy explains that, we are conscious beings. We are parts of God. We are eternal, individual, conscious beings. And as conscious beings, we have an element of individuality and independence. We can observe many different things. We can choose what we want to look at, what we want to listen to, what we want to associate with. We make choices in the way that we act, in the way that we interact. So we have an element of freedom. It's the essence of our individuality. Consciousness, individuality without an element of freedom and free choice and independence would be totally meaningless. However, there is one small problem with freedom of choice and the ability to choose, is that since we are a part of a bigger system, we have to, in the end, we have to cooperate with the cosmic order. We have to follow certain rules. Within following those rules, we have complete freedom, but there are boundaries to our freedom. And so within the eternal reality, which is the spiritual existence of every eternal soul, there are certain souls that have desire to have more power and to exercise more power than they would normally have. It's their choice. They would like to be able to control more, to be more active, to be kind of creators, to be kind of a little bit like God. It's in a way imitating God. And when we desire more power, in principle, it's not a problem, because if we use that power in the service of God, in the service of the cosmic order, then it's still benign and it's still benevolent, and you can still enjoy that power, but doing it in a constructive way. If, however, we get intoxicated by power and we become narcissistic and we elevate our ego to a position that is not warranted within the context of the cosmic order, because in the end, we are all tiny parts of an infinite large reality. If we go against that cosmic order, we become kind of like cosmic criminals or cosmic misdemeanors, whereby our desire for power leads to the suffering of other entities. We are infringing on their freedom. And then karma is invoked. And these are the laws of karma. It's basically making sure that everyone is aligning with the cosmic order and is not transgressing his boundaries. When we do that, there is karma. And that's when we fall down into lower levels of existence in the material universe. And we enter into a kind of reality that we all are, like this planet Earth, within this particular universe and this particular time. It's a planet, and the life and the circumstances in there are created by our collective karma, based on our previous actions in our previous lives. And of course, you know, the law of karma must be connected to the law of reincarnation, otherwise it doesn't make any sense. So that leads to a devolution of a soul from a very divine spiritual status to something which has become materialistic, which has become selfish, which has become self-centered and narcissistic, descending into, you know, what we call evil. So this world is basically the result of our inability to abide by the cosmic order and our desire to enhance our power at the expense of other beings.
You seem to be delving into the ancient tradition of India. What is consciousness? And is that also substantiated by scientific research?
Well, consciousness is in the end the biggest mystery of life, in the sense that without consciousness, there is no life. You could even argue without consciousness, there is no existence, at least for us as individuals. So scientists are, of course, baffled by consciousness. Even the most materialistic, mechanistically thinking scientists who believe that consciousness is just a byproduct of the brain, they call it epiphenomenalism, being a byproduct of a brain, very complex organ with, again, billions of cells, neurons that are interacting in inconceivably complex ways. They believe that complexity creates an emergent property. And that emergent property is consciousness. But consciousness is not residing in any of the atoms or subatomic particles that make up the neurons or the molecules that make up the neurons. Consciousness is not there in any fundamental way. It's an emergent property. But then I'm coming back to the same point I made earlier. Something cannot come from nothing. Even properties are still part of the substances that they are related to. You never see sugar, white and sweet. You never see it disconnected from the substance sugar. Properties are always related to substances. You never find properties independent of any substance. So if there is a property of consciousness, that property somehow must inhere in a substance. It can't just be nowhere, because then again, you create a situation where something is coming from nothing. So according to Vedanta philosophy, consciousness is in fact just one of the many energies that exist in the universe, but a very special one. It's a spiritual energy in the sense that it is conscious, which is one of the definitions of spiritual, because spiritual we associate that with consciousness. And it stands in its own right. It's eternal. Just like all matter in the end, as Einstein explained through his famous equation E is mc square, matter is a transformation of energy. So in the end, everything is energy. And in fact, everything by definition, therefore, is eternal. So consciousness too, in fact, is eternal. And our individuality in that sense, because consciousness is also individuality, you can separate the two. Again, like you can separate sugar from an underlying substance, you cannot separate consciousness from individuality. Consciousness by definition is individual. So we have an eternal individual reality. And that is what we call in Vedanta philosophy a soul or atma. And it's an eternal existing thing. And it's a mystery because in many ways consciousness has different properties than the material world, which is we experience as not conscious, like the table I'm sitting at or the window that I'm looking at. So consciousness is just totally mystifying. And it's in the end the most important thing because it makes reality, and it makes us, and it makes us being able to have this discussion at all, because without consciousness, you and I wouldn't be having this discussion. Yeah, so consciousness is fundamental. It's not a byproduct of matter. It's an eternal energy in its own right, but it has an interaction with matter. Our consciousness right now is embodied in a physical body, and through a very ingenious system, brain, nervous system, senses, physical attributes, we are able to interact with that world in an almost seamless way. But yet consciousness is separate from matter. It's separate from our body. And that's what reincarnation is all about, that this body is born, grows old, then eventually becomes incapacitated, and it dies. But the soul, the consciousness within that body doesn't die along with it. And it will carry on, but it will have to assume, because the soul is attached to the physical, the material world, it wants to play its power game. It wants to exercise its independence. So it will have to take a new body in order to continue to carry on that journey. But fundamentally, consciousness is an energy, and therefore similar in that sense to matter, but it's a different manifestation of energy. Just like fire creates two very different properties, namely heat and light. And they have similarities. They may be electromagnetic, and they may be in terms of physical properties similar, but we experience them as two very different properties. So in the same way, God has different energies, and there are two very separate energies. One is called matter, and the other one is called spirit, and is consciousness.
There's a whole chapter in your book, Intelligence or Chaos, with the title Paradox. Now, is it just a way to, kind of, go out the back door and say, well, it's like this or it's like that, and maybe it sounds like it's not exactly the way it is? Or how did you come about? How did that chapter come about? What is the meaning?
Well, it's got a meaning in two senses. In contemporary physics, this paradox has become very relevant. In the 1920s, it was discovered the theory of quantum physics was formulated by a number of great physicians like Niels Bohr, Max Planck, and Werner Heisenberg. And they formulated this theory, and which is in itself kind of mystical, because one of the key things of this theory is that they discovered that matter or material particles on a subatomic level sometimes act like a particle and sometimes they act like a wave. And what they found is that it is simultaneously the same. It is a particle and a wave at the same time. Now, these are two states of being that are mutually exclusive, because a particle is localized in specific location. It has a specific dimension and it's localized, whereas a wave is more or less everywhere within a certain amount of space. So how can they both be the same? It's a mystery, and yet it's a reality that's been observed to be existing. While it's from a logical point of view, it's kind of doesn't make sense. Now, I call this along with the explanation that's given in Vedanta philosophy that I will come to, a supralogical principle, because it's in a way illogical. Our logic gets stuck there, yet it's empirically verified and empirically observed. And in the end, experience is more important even than logic. If we experience something and it appears illogical, then the experience is still the prevailing reality. So there is a hierarchy between perception and logic. You know, in the end, logic is a derivative of perception, not the other way around. So in Vedanta philosophy, this principle is explained as achintya bheda bheda tattva. This was formulated by a great saint and philosopher and mystic, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who lived in the 15th century. And he explained that reality and ultimately God is simultaneously one and different from his creation. So God is one entity, yet within that oneness, there exists an infinite amount of duality and plurality. So he's one and different simultaneously. And this principle, he described it as achintya, meaning it's inconceivable. But it's not, inconceivability is not that it's illogical, but it's supralogical, because we empirically are able to verify it. And now we are not able to directly observe God and his energies doing that, you know, manifesting this principle of achintya. But we are seeing it on the lower levels of his creation. We are seeing it in the way that matter functions. We see it in the way that in mathematics, for instance, you know, mathematical paradoxes are resolved. Because there are many mathematical paradoxes that are related to the one-many problem. Very famous is Russell's paradox, where he discovered that if you have a set of things and something is a member of that set, then it becomes simultaneously a member and not a member. And you know, in mathematics, we have a very fundamental issue that, you know, we have numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc. This is the set of numbers, but the meaning, the parts of that set, each individual number derives its meaning from the fact that it's part of the set. It has its own, the number 6 has its own individual existence, but it's kind of meaningless without the number 7 behind it or the number 5 before it. So everything in the universe, from mathematics to space to the relation between matter and its properties, it's all based on this principle of achintya, simultaneous oneness and difference. And maybe I'll give a very interesting example. This is the example of the paradoxes of Zeno. You know, Zeno was the one who said that if you have a tortoise and a fast runner, that the fast runner will never be able to overtake the tortoise if the tortoise has, let's say, 1 meter or 2 meters ahead in a running contest. Because by the time that he has passed the 2 meters he is ahead, the tortoise will have, you know, covered another distance. So then he will have to cover that distance. By the time the tortoise has done that, he will have covered that distance. So you end up with an infinity of number of passages that he will have to make to be able to take over the tortoise. And so infinity, of course, can never be achieved. And that is the paradox of Zeno, which is a very famous paradox, but basically talks about the fact that distance or space is simultaneously an infinite number of points or infinite number of parts, and simultaneously it's a unity. A meter is 1 meter, it's a unity. Yet you can divide a meter up into an infinite number of parts. The same with time. Time is also, it's a continuation, it's a continuum. It flows from the past to the present to the future. Yet you can divide up time into even smaller units. A second, a part of a second. You know, the smallest in physics, the smallest unit of time is Planck time, which is considered to be the smallest, most fundamental unit of time, which is, I think, 10 to the power minus 43. So here too, we find that time and space are both consisting of parts, of components that can be divided up, yet at the same time, it's a unity, it's a continuum, it's a paradox. So this is the achintya principle manifesting itself in every part of creation.
What have you found in this philosophy of Vedanta? I believe there's also a description of a totally different type of universe.
Yes, the Vedanta philosophy explains that, you know, in the end, the universe is infinite, but the material universe that we are in is part of that infinite universe. So in a way, it's It's the multiverse concept, but then from a very different angle, because I'm very much against the multiverse concept as the way atheists employ it, because they use it as a justification for explaining how we happen to be by accident in the right universe where life might have emerged by chance, because there are infinite numbers of big bangs. There are infinite number of parallel universes where the values of these four forces happen to be different than ours, and therefore, these are all universes that turned out to be a failure, and we happen to be living in a universe that is not a failure, where the four forces happen to have the exact right relationships to one another. So it's a kind of a multiverse concept that's used as a cop-out to explain the inconceivable probability that this universe could have come about by chance, because they say there's infinite universes, so out of infinity there will at least be one that will work. That happens to be the one that we are in. Now, the problem with that theory is that these other parallel universes, we will never be able to perceive them. They are fundamentally beyond our reach because they exist in totally different dimensions, time, space, continuums, and so on. So fundamentally, we're disconnected from it. So from a scientific point of view, it's a useless argument, because something that's fundamentally unverifiable is scientifically speaking, is dead. Because verifiability, the ability to experience something, is a critical component in what we call empirical science. Now, Vedanta philosophy explains that there are other universes, but they are connected to ours, but they are made of a different quality of existence. So we're living in this material universe, which has a certain quality, certain properties. There is another spiritual universe where living entities reside that are not so keen on having power. They're not so keen on being creators. They're not so keen on trying to imitate God, but they're quite happy living in the world, just spontaneously complying and cooperating with the cosmic order in a loving and serving relationship with God. And that spiritual universe is qualitatively and fundamentally different from ours. It's made of energy, but it's made of a superior energy. And that superior energy lacks the qualities that we find in matter that are so limiting. And from that point of view, if we think or dream about some kind of paradise or some perfect life and perfect universe, that's what we would end up, because in that universe, it's called Vaikuntha. First of all, there is no material body. We don't reincarnate there. We have an eternal spiritual body that is not subjected to birth and death and disease and old age. It's an eternal existence where the time is simply the eternal present. There's no past and no future. There's the eternal present. And it's in Sanskrit, this universe described as Sat, Chit, Ananda. Sat means it's eternally existent. Chit means it's full of knowledge. So everyone living in that universe is fully knowledgeable. And even most important, Ananda, it's blissful. It's a life, an existence which is permeated with infinite blissful emotions, everlasting, never boring. And totally exciting and a state of perfect happiness. And that's when we think about God creating a perfect universe. That is that perfect universe. Now, we've moved away from that for the reasons I explained earlier. Some living beings have a desire to acquire some more power. It's the love for power versus the power of love. Whereas the spiritual universe, Vaikuntha, is dominated by the power of love and the spontaneous desire of living entities residing in that spiritual universe to cooperate with the cosmic order and to do that in loving service in relationship to God. So that may sound to people like a fairy tale. And in many ways, you could say it's a fairy tale like. That doesn't mean it cannot be reality. Because there are realities, in any case, even many of the aspects of science as we know it, when they describe our material universe, almost sound like a fairy tale. If you look at a black hole, or if you look at the Milky Way, or you look at some of the pictures that are taken by the Hubble telescope, penetrating into deep space for billions of years, that's also almost like a fairy tale. If you look at the cosmos, it's like unbelievable. The planet Earth, is so, in that sense, kind of mundane compared to that infinite universe. So that already sense of fairy tale. But, you're still in this violent material universe with supernovas and big bangs and explosions and, big rips and, exploding comets and whatever. So the spiritual universe, lacking all the imperfection of the material universe, certainly has that fairy tale quality. But in the end, it's deep inside what every being is yearning for. It's perfect existence, eternal existence, and blissful existence. And the reason we're yearning for it, because it's our constitutional nature. In fact, you can't even desire something that you don't have any experience of. Why would we desire to have perfect happiness, if we have never experienced that kind of happiness? Of course, we have some taste of happiness in this world, but it's quite limited. And, so we have a yearning for much more satisfaction than that. It's very deep. The fear of death. Why is there that fear of death? Why we are so anxious about it? The existentialist philosophers talk about it all the time, the fear of finitude. Why are we so afraid of that? Because it's not our nature to be dying. It's not, our nature is to live and to exist. So even from a psychological point of view, we can understand why there is a yearning for a perfect reality. But there is a lot of scientific evidence for that, because through science, we have proven that God must exist. That also implies there must be another universe where the theodicy is not functioning, and where, in fact, that perfect life without pain and suffering is also existing. So that's the explanation that's given in the Vedanta philosophy.
Well, that was a lot of information. I have to take some time to process it all and take it in. The book is available. If you think that this is, has been a wonderful talk, get your copy of the book and educate yourself.
Yeah, the book is available. I'm a very firm believer in logic and common sense. And so in the end, there's a lot of scientific theories that are extremely complex, sophisticated, highly intelligent, but they also have to, in the end, there has to be this strong element of common sense. I sometimes call it the elephant in the room, the fact that the complexity of this universe on every level, in fact, has convinced many, even famous atheist philosophers to revert. There's one very famous atheist philosopher, Anthony Flew. He became convinced by some of the books that were written on intelligent design. He said, the level of complexity cannot be emerging out of pure chaos. It's just impossible. It's, I call it the elephant in the room. And I think we all have that experience, that the complexity, this universe is complex. Our bodies are complex. Our interactions are complex. This planet is complex. Everything is just unbelievably complex. And as science progresses, we delve deeper and deeper and deeper into the layers of complexity. We find that it's practically infinite, the levels of complexity. And it just doesn't make sense to explain that complexity away as it came out of nothing, or it came about by accident, just a few atoms bumping into one another. It just doesn't make sense anymore. So I see that as a fundamental turning point in history, where atheism has been on the rise for the last 200 years. I think we're going to have a reversal, that God is going to be rehabilitated, and his existence is going to be much more sensible and logical, and less fairy tale-like, and less based on superstition and fanaticism and sectarianism, but a kind of universal scientific philosophical understanding of the fact that our universe must have been created and designed and managed by a conscious, intelligent being, and we are part of that.
With these wise words, I thank you again, and hopefully we'll see you on another one of our editions of this interview
It's been
series.
a great pleasure, Rasa, and I hope to see you again next time. Thanks again.